changes that we are currently making. So this program we started in 1996. Amanda Bosch was an astronomer at Lowell at the time, and she and I wanted to do something outreach related, and we felt that the kids in the Flagstaff area itself could take advantage of what was already offered on Mars Hill, but that instead we wanted to do something for kids that would be in more remote areas, and particularly in the Navajo and Hopi nations. So we got together and came up with an idea, and we spent the summer of 1996 going around on the Navajo and Hopi Nation talking to people, and we put together this program. The goal of the program is to help teachers get kids excited about science. That's the whole thing, right there. And by science, I mean more broadly STEM. But the idea was that we felt that scientists had something useful to offer teachers in the classroom. And so that was the basic idea, that we could help teachers get kids excited about science. And so the heart of the program are the partnerships. There are astronomers and educators at Lowell and sometimes at NAU who are interested in participating in our program, and I match an astronomer with a teacher on the Navajo or Hopi Nation school, and they work together as a partnership for a year, for a school year. And the astronomer goes out to the classroom and does hands-on activities, and we primarily work with, at the beginning we just worked with 5th through 8th grade, and the reason behind that was that we wanted to catch kids in the transition between the little kids who are natural-born scientists and they're excited about everything, and the high school kids who are uninterested in everything. So we wanted that transition period. So as I said, the heart of the program are the classroom visits. The astronomer goes out to the classroom. We've worked with schools as close as to the city and Loop, so that's only an hour and a fraction hour away, drive away. So I measure everything in terms of hours driving, and we worked with Ojo Encino in New Mexico, which was a 6-hour drive away. So we work with a large range of schools, and we do hands-on astronomy activities. We are astronomers. We are astronomy-centric. We do talk about biology when we do astrobiology. We can talk about chemistry when we talk about the chemistry on different planets. But we are astronomy-centered. And so you can see here just a collection of activities. The top middle one, we make a model of a comet nucleus with water and dry ice and some corn syrup for the organic molecules and some ammonia and a little dirt mixed in. And the kids make those in plastic bags. And the one just below that, they study what affects size of impact craters by dropping rocks into pans of flour. And if you put a layer of cocoa across the top, you can see the rays caused by the splatter from the flour underneath, which I always find cool. You just have to tell the kids they can't eat the cocoa. And then this one here is an activity having to do with building up shield volcanoes. And then one of the folks in our program is getting a degree here at NAU in mechanical engineering. And so this is from one of her classroom visits. She has the kids make edible rovers, but the rover has to be able to roll down an inclined plane. It has to be functional at that level. And what we do is we provide all of the materials for the teacher. So we make these bins like this that contain everything they need, any presentation we give to introduce the activity and so forth. So our goal is really to help the teachers learn about astronomy activities that they can do in the classroom that are fun and exciting. And so we give them the materials, we hold teacher workshops periodically, and so forth. And at the very beginning of our program, when we were first going around talking to people, we had both Hopi and Navajo people tell us you have to include traditional astronomy, and you have to make those cultural connections. So we knew at the very beginning that this was something that we wanted to do, but it took us some years to develop that. And about 15 years ago or so, we started working with Vernon Tossault, whom you met last night, who's sitting over there. She agreed to collaborate with us in coming to the Navajo classrooms we were working with, talking about the Navajo constellations and traditional thoughts and ideas. So we've had that collaboration with her. We hold star parties periodically. We have to. We're astronomers. We're required to. So we hold star parties, which are fun. We also hold field trips for the classes. The teacher is invited to bring their class to Lowell Observatory, usually in the spring, to on field trips. And these are just pictures from one field trip we had some time ago. For example, so we have several Lowell telescopes that are used for research that are just about a half-hour drive from Flagstaff. And so these are pictures of kids in the control rooms of the telescope and on the floor of the telescope, learning about how we use telescopes, see telescopes, professional telescopes. And this particular activity, so we usually divide the kids up into groups and they go around from station to station and they learn about, and several of the stations are in the telescopes and one of them is outside visual observing, and then several other activities. This one up here in the corner is one of my favorite. Will Grundy is an astronomer at Lowell, and he is on the New Horizons team. He studies ices on Pluto and such as that. So we do a liquid nitrogen demonstration, which is always cool. Kids love that. You dip a flower in and then you break it all over the place. Or gummy bears, those are really fun. Kids love that. But he combines it with a household, like ammonia and stuff like that. He has a certain recipe that creates this sludge, which is, he says, is similar to ices that you might find in the outer solar system. So that's fun. We also, Alethea Little is one of the members of our team, and she's worked with Verna and created the Navajo Constellation Bingo game. So when kids come out, and sometimes when we go to the classroom, we'll have them play bingo, but the bingo is of Navajo constellations. And we've also, she has also created a Navajo planisphere. So they make a planisphere and they can drop in the Greek or they can drop in the Navajo on this. And we also, every few years, hold teacher workshops. We provide all of the materials. This is Mary Demuth, who has been responsible for many years for collecting all of the materials for all of the activities that we share with them, so that the teachers can walk into their classroom the next day and do these activities if they choose. So over the first 22 years, we worked with something like 100 teachers and 3,000 students. directly, and mostly in Arizona, but also New Mexico and Utah. And so that was the program for the first 22 years. And we're now ending our 23rd year. But so it was in March of 2016, I wrote an article in Physics Today, and I just happened upon it. And it was an open letter from a professor at a historically all-black women's college. He was a physics professor, and the open letter was to Supreme Court Justice Roberts, but he was addressing the question of that Supreme Court Justice Roberts asked, what is the value of having minorities in your science classroom? Somewhere in his letter, he noted that he had realized in teaching these women, these black women, that it wasn't enough to teach them physics. That what he needed to do, if he really wanted to get them interested in physics and perhaps going on in physics, he needed to show them that they too could be physicists. And I read that and I got, oh no. Because I had founded this program on the idea that if we showed kids that science was fun, everything else would follow. Right? And what he was saying, that's not enough. You've got to show them that they too could be a scientist. And this should have been, I guess this should have been clear, because one of the things we would do at the beginning, before we came on our first classroom visit, we would have the kids draw a picture of a scientist, astronomer, and describe the astronomer. And so the pictures that you get are usually the mad scientist, in a white lab coat, always male. So a male person with a foreign accent. They're described as having a foreign accent. This is not them. This picture is a picture of somebody else, right? This isn't them. They're not seeing themselves as scientists. So this was a crisis of faith for me about the program. We're not really accomplishing our goal. And about the same time, I don't remember how it came about, but I learned about something called project-based learning. I'm not an educator. I don't know the lingo, but I had started to hear about this. And also at the same time, we had someone at Lowell Observatory, Todd Gonzalez, who was trained here at NAU as a middle school teacher, and he was trained in project-based learning. And so all of these things came together, and we began to think, we need to do something to help kids see themselves as scientists, and project-based learning sounded like something that we wanted to get involved. So I called together a small group of teachers to advise us. And I brought them to Lowell. These were teachers that we had worked with in the past. Myrna was one of them. And we asked them, within the constraints of what we can do, because we can't do everything, what could we do that would help increase the impact of our program? Specifically thinking of this issue of how do they see themselves as scientists. And they told us that we should do something I never, ever, ever would have imagined that I would say those same words myself. Curriculum development. So they said you need to do curriculum development. And my non-educator eyes just go, what's that? But Todd Gonzalez is trained as an educator. He's trained in his PBL, And so we did a pilot project where we worked with Verna, and we did a 5th grade unit, we meaning Todd and Verna, and did a 5th grade unit on characteristics of the planets. And so we did this as a pilot project. The whole idea of the curriculum development is that we would create a unit, and Todd made it a week-long unit. So it's not a whole school year, it's just a unit, a single little unit. It's for each grade level, it's based on a science standard for that grade level. And the teachers of the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Nation have to address all of the standards. They don't just address the state standard for the state they're in. They have to address Common Core, Next Generation standards, the new Arizona state standards, and the DNAME standards. So he tried to align what we were doing with all of the standards and to make them something that the teachers can really use. We include math, we include reading, we include writing. And the idea of, he makes it project-based learning or problem-based learning. There's an overlap. And the idea is to use that to let the students take a little bit of ownership about the experiment that they're doing. And so that it isn't just us saying, okay, you're going to drop the rocks into the pans of flour and measure this and come to some conclusion, where it's a little more open-ended. And then, with Verna's help, we then, instead of having the cultural connection being something completely separate that comes in, she would come to the classroom and talk about traditional astronomy as a separate lesson. Instead, cultural and local connections are woven into the unit, as part of the unit. Okay? And this is so that students can see the science is more relevant to their lives. We felt that if we did these things, that all of these things, that this would make it more useful to teachers and our program would have a greater impact. And our advisory group also said you should go down to 4th grade as well. And because we hadn't worked with 4th grade prior to this, they felt that elementary school teachers could use what we had to give even more than on the higher grades. So we started last year working with 4th through 7th grade, and next year we're adding 8th grade. So we will cover 4th through 8th grade. So at the end of the pilot project, the advisory group met and they said, this is great. You've got to do more. You've got to do 4th through 7th grade. And so we decided, okay, we'll do that. We set up a collaboration with the Kayenta Unified School District. And we're working with 2 4th, 2 5th, 2 6th, the 1 7th, and then next year also the 1 8th grade teacher. This year we developed the curriculum. We are now in the process of reviewing the year, how it went, revising the curriculum, and they're going to do it next year again. Then in the 3rd year we'll work with the other teachers that we haven't worked with in 4th through 6th grade, and our first group of teachers are going to act as mentors to the second group. And then that will end a 3-year collaboration with KUSD. So it's a very different model for these 3 years for our program than what we've done before, because we're working in an intense way with the same teachers and the same schools for 3 years. Before, we would just work with whoever signed up, wherever they were, whatever grade level they were. The original name of our program was the Navajo Hopi Astronomy Outreach Program. And then Alethea Little, when she came on board, she said she started talking with Apache's teachers, and they were really excited to participate. And so at her urging, we've changed our name to Native American astronomy outreach program, so to reflect the fact that we want to include other tribes as well. Unfortunately, I haven't had the money yet to work with an Apache group, but the intention is there. Alethea also realized that having a role models was very important, and she's gone gung-ho on that. She has contacted, so she's already started bringing Raytheon, Navajo engineers from Raytheon in Tucson and in Farmington to our field trips to interact with the students and tell their stories. And last year, I really felt the power of role models, particularly one gentleman. And they stood up and they talked to the kids, telling them their stories. And one gentleman, instead of giving the usual story of, I did this, and then I did this, and I did this, and then I did this, and I ended up at Raytheon, and I really enjoyed my career, he said, I did this, and I really screwed up. And I really, I just made a mess of my life. And I pulled myself up, and this is how I did it, and I went on. And I thought that was probably the most valuable thing the kids could hear, is perseverance. And she's talked with IBM and Boeing, and she would try to get, actually, this last election, there were a couple of Native legislators that were elected. She's working on getting them to come talk to the kids. And there's also a Native astronaut, retired, but Native astronaut she's working on. And also at Alethea, a lot of this is Alethea's motivation, instigation. Alethea argued for summer camps. So starting last year, we had summer camps for 6th and 7th graders that build off the curriculum that we are doing in the classroom. And so the kids that we're working with in the classroom are invited to apply to come to summer camp. And it expands on what they were doing in the classroom. And next summer we're going to add 8th grade summer. So these are just pictures from the residential summer camp. They toured the ice lab, which is Will Grundy's laboratory, in which he is making ices to replicate what would happen on the on Pluto or Titan or Europa. Titan, they can understand the origin of those spectrum. What you're looking at, what kind of lakes you might have if you have it's made of methane and you have a certain amount of nitrogen in it, or blah blah blah. I don't know it. I don't understand it. But that's what he does. And they on one night they camp out and look at the sky, and they made a Mars terrarium here, and solar ovens, and of course bottle rockets and that kind of thing. Alethea said, but at the end of it's a week long. At the end of the week, the kids said, "Can we stay another week?" So it was good. So the 4th grade unit is based on erosion, idea of erosion, and it in particular studies sand dunes. So I learned this when Todd put together the 4th grade unit, that sand dunes are a real issue on the Navajo Nation. That the sand dunes are taking over the grazing area, and Verna has talked about periodically having to shovel sand away to get to outbuildings, and so it's an issue. The 4th grade classes we worked with this year, they went to, we gave them an anemometer for measuring wind speed, and they went out to Mystery Valley on a field trip, and they studied the erosion that they saw there, and they made measurements of their anemometer to understand how the wind might change in and around peak structures. And in the classroom, the activity was to, there's a sand, you make a little sand dune and you have a fan, and you try to understand how, by blowing, not too hard, but blowing on the sand dune, you try and see how it might change or move over time. And the kids, of course, the kids themselves said, there are sand dunes here or here, near where they live. And they got the idea, let's take pictures let's take a picture of the sand dunes now. Let's come back in a few years and take another picture and see how it's changed over time. So, and then, having studied sand dunes in that way, sand dunes here on Earth, then they're given this picture up here and asked what caused that structure on Mars. And so they're sand dunes. Which way are they moving? You can tell by looking at it, if you study the sand dunes, which way are they moving and stuff like that. We did this for 5th grade, and the teachers told us they really liked it so much that they wanted it for all grades. And that is that the students would make posters of their project. In other words, of their sand dunes and what they concluded about this thing on Mars. That they would make a poster of this, and then when they came to Lowell on their field trip, we would have a poster session, like a AAS, American Astronomical Society poster meeting. So you put your poster up. They all put their posters up. We invite the Lowell staff to come and go around from poster to poster and let the kids tell you about their project. And this is a big thing for the kids. They practice. They practice shaking hands. They practice orally giving their talk. They've memorized their talks, which I do too, but they've memorized their talks. And because one kid will start and the other kid will correct him, you're supposed to say it this way. But they work really hard because this is hard. I mean, it's hard for adults to get up and give talks, but to talk with a stranger when you're in 4th grade isn't easy. So anyway, we have posters and poster sessions. We also have a technology component that for each activity, and the activity they all involve robots. Robots are fun. They allow you to learn programming. All but one of the classes use Ozobots, and these tiny little you're shaking these tiny little robots which you program by doing a color code. So the robot follows this black line that you put down, and then if you want it to do something, there's a color code that it can read, and it can twirl around and do various things. And they're supposed to use that as a representation for what they're studying. And then for the 5th grade class, just because that's how we started, for the 5th grade class they use spheros, which are just bigger round robots. A computer. There's a particular name I can't think of right now. A laptop kind of computer, only smaller. Notebook or something. Which they can then program it in a more direct way than color coding. The cultural connections are based on the DNA standards for that grade level. And in this case, it has to do with the connection of the DNA to the soil and in sand paintings. 5th grade is characteristics of the planets. And in that case, we restricted ourselves to Earth, Venus, and Mars because the DNA, the Navajo language, has words for those. So they study the characteristics of the planets. Then we ask them about how to expand on what they've learned to Jupiter and so forth. But the focus is on those 3 planets. And understanding the characteristics on those planets, and then asking themselves what are the characteristics necessary for life on the planets. And so the activity in the classroom is based on creating in a bottle. And these bottles here, the simple little bottles, they try and recreate some of the key characteristics of the 3 planets. Water on Earth, cold on Mars. Venus would have some acid in it or something. And yeast is put in all of them, and they put a balloon over it. And if the yeast is thriving, then the balloon blows up. And the idea is that the size of the balloon tells you something about how good that environment was for life. And so they do that. And then their poster is sort of a travel brochure, a travel advertisement for the planet of their choice, either Venus or Mars. And they have to think about, okay, if I were to go live on Mars, what would I take with me? And in particular, what cultural aspects would I take with me that would help me thrive there? And so that's what they do. 6th grade has to do with the energy cycle and taking that we get sunlight, we get energy from the sun, and this is the fuel for an energy cycle that involves primary consumers and secondary consumers and tertiary consumers and so forth. And so it's really cool. This is their Ozobot track there, and the Ozobot goes around the energy cycle, and so the students described it to me that things start out slowly, and then it goes by the consumer, and it gets energy, and so it goes faster. And then, but as you get to the tertiary consumer, it kind of slows down, and then when it decays, the tertiary consumer decays and becomes the material then for the initial consumers. Then it slows down even further, that kind of thing. But what's really cool about this activity is that having learned this, and there's a game. Todd made up a game to help them understand the cycle, and it involves sunlight is just the classroom light, and then there's the individual students play a role either as the initial producer, the plant that takes the sunlight, and they use poker chips to accumulate the glucose molecule together. And then you have your secondary consumers and so forth and so on. And then they see the limitation as it takes time for the sunlight to produce, through the initial consumer, produce the glucose molecule, and for the tertiary consumer to assemble what it needs to actually get energy. And so there's this sort of they see the limiting factor, and then you turn off the light and say, oh, we've had an asteroid hit and the sunlight has been dimmed. What happens now? And then you see the tertiary consumer dies off and so forth and so on. And so that's kind of fun. But the really cool thing to me is the students understand this cycle well enough that now you ask them, what is the cycle on Europa? What is the cycle on Titan? Europa is the moon of Jupiter's, and Titan is the moon of Saturn. And that's really cool. They have to, they understand that these objects are far away from the sun, so they don't get as much sunlight as we get here on Earth. Where does that initial energy come from? Well, in both cases, it comes from hydrothermal vents, apparently. That's what I learned last night, or the other night. And then it goes from there. And they invent, because we don't know, they invent consumers, little animals, like these. Well, they're not good pictures here, but on their poster, they have these wonderful animals they've invented. So, the 7th grade one has to do with ecosystems in space, and the idea is, okay, you want to go to Mars. How are you going to do that? how are you as a person going to live going to Mars? And so they study growing plants on hydrothermally, hydroponic, thank you, and so forth. Okay? To end up, that just gives you a flavor for our program. The assets for our program, I don't know why I put this in here, but the assets are a fantastic team of people. We have people who are just passionate about sharing astronomy and sharing science with kids, and they are our asset. And then also, one of the things I've come to realize recently is teachers keep telling me that our program has a very good reputation, and so that's very important to me that we maintain our integrity. And what is the challenge? Just briefly, funding. All of our funding comes from outside sources, from individuals and private foundations. When we start the school year, we have no idea what our income will be for that school year. Somehow, for 23 years, we have managed to more or less end without going over what we got during the school year, but it's a real challenge. We have all these great ideas of things we want to do and expansions we want to make, but the funding is a challenge, as it is everywhere. That's all I have to say.